There are a few incontrovertible truths in this world. The sky is blue, water is wet, and John Wick is one of the greatest action movies of all time. This movie completely revolutionized the flagging action genre and is solely responsible for redefining what it meant to be an action movie. The series raised the bar to stratospheric levels for stunt work, gunplay, and martial arts action, and it did so off the back of a sleeper hit that literally nobody saw coming. All of this is known. We're not here to gush over the action sequences, though I still might have to a little bit. We're not here to cry about the puppy, although tears might still be shed. We're here to take a look at the world that was created in this first outing, and how it used both spoken and unspoken elements to thrust the audience straight into this dark reality of organized crime. So settle in, grab your favorite emotional support firearm, and let's get into it. Now, unfortunately, we've got to start with a bit of a gripe, that being how they've initially treated the legend of John Wick. In the original script, John was in his 60s, he'd been out of the game for a decade or more, and though his legend was still around, people had begun to forget about the man behind it. The story was still the same, one of death, murder, and revenge. It's just that John himself was a little more long in the tooth. When you compare the original script to the movie we got, we find that John has been made younger, and he's only been retired for about 5.5 years. On its face, this doesn't seem like a particularly large change, and honestly it isn't, at least not in the way that significantly impacts the plot. But it has led to my gripe, which is this. There is no way that Yosef Tarasov didn't know who John Wick was, let alone Wick's legend as the Baba Yaga. Even if we concede that he didn't know John by sight, and maybe even name, Yosef definitely knew of him. At the very least, he knew of the Baba Yaga. Now, from a writing perspective, this gripe is rendered moot. We needed Yosef to have no idea who John actually was, so he could be a stand-in for the audience when Vigo delivered his monologue about him.
John is a man of focus, commitment, sheer will. Something you know very little about.
His ignorance serves as the framework through which the rest of the movie can take place. He might have been a royal prick, but I highly doubt he would have killed John's dog had he known who Wick was. This issue is exacerbated by the fact that everywhere John goes, he's greeted by people that either know him on a personal level or have worked with him in some form or fashion. And this isn't even taking into account the fact that John is responsible for the level of power and status that the Tarasov family currently holds. He's the one that set them up in their position, and before he retired, he was beholden to them as their personal hitman. It just doesn't hang. With the original script, a decade or longer gap between when John leaves the life and the story begins gives plenty of wiggle room for someone like Yosef to not know of John, especially given their relative ages. Now, with all that being said, this really is the only issue that I have with this movie from a writing perspective. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. It's simply a narrative holdover from the original script. But it's just something I thought I'd mention since it bugs me every time I watch the movie. One of the things I love about this movie, honestly almost more than the action, is the way in which the world John moves through is structured. It's a rare thing these days that a director will trust his audience to see something and understand it without further explanation. But that's exactly what we got when Chad Stahelski gave us this masterpiece. To highlight what I'm talking about, I've got 3 examples for you. The gold coins that this world runs on, the world's relationship to law enforcement, and the costume design informing both the world and its characters. Now, our first look at the gold coins occurs when John is, quite literally, unearthing his past. Digging up the tools of his trade, he reveals a sizable cache of these coins. At first glance, it would make sense for someone in John's position to have an untraceable currency he could use to barter his way to a target. However, it's only after we see the same gold coins in Vigo's safe that we realize there's more to these things than we originally thought. Their existence is adroitly set up first, and their purpose is then revealed as John uses them to pay for the body disposal of the goons he's taken out. We're shown how the coins are used, rather than told, like we will be with the markers of the second movie. But that's a future video. We're also shown how these coins are a multi-use currency, as later in the movie, John uses them to pay for both his room at the Continental and the cover charge to its lounge. As a side note, I've always wanted to know what the conversion rate is on these things, and how they're put into circulation, like how they're filtered down from someone like Vigo to a corner boy on the street. I've got a theory that they're part of like a subscription service the Continental offers, but I won't be going into that too much here. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. My second example of showing over telling is when the cops show up to John's house, just after he's killed the aforementioned goons. Gun in hand, John approaches the front door, which is lit up with the red and blue lights of a cop car. John answers the door and we find Jimmy, an officer of the law who's on a first-name basis with John. This guy actually sees the bodies that John has just dropped, and his only question is if John has started working again. Now, this moment is played for a laugh, and deservedly so, but it also has a secondary purpose. It sets up the world's relationship to the law and its enforcement in a manner that is carried through the entire series. That is to say that this world has its own set of rules and exists completely outside the normal bounds of society. There are people in the know, but there isn't a damn thing they can do about the goings-on within it. It's a brilliant touch, and for such a small moment, its ramifications have been more far-reaching than perhaps anything else in the series. Finally, I want to touch on the movie's costume design. Taken at face value, the costuming sets the world up as a slick and sexy realm apart. One totally divorced from the world you or I know, and one whose foundations are built on mountain ranges of ill-gotten cash. And while this face value interpretation is perfectly respectable, there's more to it than that. These aren't just suits. They're part of a uniform that every person who works in this world must wear. When John makes his first foray back into the underworld, he puts on a three-piece suit. Vigo, as head of a crime family, is always dressed impeccably. Charon and Winston are both immaculately dressed at all times, showing that they're constantly in the world's deep waters. And when Yosef goes to meet his father, he wears a suit jacket and slacks, but no shirt or tie, indicating he doesn't yet understand how this world works. More so than anything else, the costuming informs the world and the character's status within it. You could even make the argument that after a certain point, bending the rules of wearing a suit denotes even further status. Vigo uses colors and patterns to break up his silhouette. Winston elects to wear a cravat rather than a tie. John keeps things monochrome, but consistently wears a vest. Tying a character's status to the clothing they wear is nothing new in cinema, but here it's done very subtly, and in a way that's a little more outside the norm. On the surface, John Wick is a movie that you don't have to think too deeply about. Hard carried by its brilliant action sequences, which became the new benchmark for the film industry, it has spawned an entire franchise that has consistently raised the bar with every outing. And while its plot may be appropriately bare bones, and that's not a dig, mind you, it doesn't need to be anything other than what it is, the world that it takes place in has captured the imagination of viewers since it first premiered back in 2014. That's right, boys and girls, the John Wick franchise is already over a decade old. To be frank, it is this world, and only this world, that has given the franchise the legs it needed to continue on as long as it has. Yes, the action is brilliant, the gun fu is phenomenal. Hell, the first time we see Wick in action, he drops 4 dudes in 6 seconds. Even Neo would be impressed with that kind of speed. Whoa. But say we stripped all that out. Say we cut back on the body count and made John Wick a crime thriller instead. The movie would still be interesting because of the world it takes place in. Conversely, if you removed the world but kept the action, you've got just another Taken or Equalizer movie. And while these may be good in their own right, they are not John Wick. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this time, so if you could do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons, I'd really appreciate it. Every little bit really helps me out. Also, go ahead and check out the other videos on my channel, or hit up my website to see my blog, and maybe buy one of my books on Amazon. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.